Welcome back, everybody. She's Always On podcast with Kianna. If you're new here, thanks for tuning in. We're episode 4. This has been another great week in the W. Edona, what have you seen?
Well, first of all, let's start off with the Las Vegas Aces. Should we start to worry because lost the last 3, currently 7th in the league? Let's unpack a little bit about that.
Yeah, honestly, I mean, even Becky Hammond alluded to it. I think their defense has not held up on the games that they've lost. They're last in the league in defensive 3-point percentage, mainly because they give up too many straight line drives. They're playing too much in rotation, and it's led them to have to play zone a lot. They played zone against Seattle. They played zone against LA, and they lit them up from 3, and against the Lynx, and they lit them up from 3. So, but I don't think it's too early to. I think it is too early to be worried. You know, Chelsea Gray's coming back. Becky Hammond, they have a ton of talent and they're all so competitive. I think they're going to figure it out and start playing a lot better.
Right. And I also think this is the beginning of the season. I know we've had a few weeks here, but I think this is probably the best time to have these problems and figure it out. And I think you brought up a great point. It's forcing them to go into this zone play because they're now able to guard one-on-one a lot, but it's also giving up a lot of 3-point shots. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how they kind of adjust to that defensively, because it's not like they don't have the pieces to defend one-on-one. Like, they have a bunch of great players, starting from the guard position to the forwards. So
yeah, they'll be just fine. Aces fans, don't worry.
Yeah, you're all good. All love here.
The 3-peat is still on the table. Don't you worry. But
Right.
The Lynx have been playing out of their mind. What have you seen from them?
Well, I want to talk about Kayla McBride because I feel like, honestly, she has stepped in such a bigger role this year. Kind of just being, not that she hasn't been an offensive threat, she's always been, but you could just tell she's got that dog on her, in her, and is just playing with so much more confidence. And I think there's also something to be said about the efficiency that she's had. I forgot which game or whatever it was, but she's going for like 5 or 6 from the 3-point line, and has just been kind of unstoppable. And I think when you have a person like that on your team, who she brings the rest of the people up, and I think they've just been looking good. And we talked about a little bit off camera how they've struggled defensively in the beginning of the season, and their offense hasn't really been such an issue, but they're starting to put those pieces together and kind of making both of those clicks.
Yeah, they're a really fun team to watch. If you haven't watched them, go watch, because their offense is popping. They move the ball really quickly. They get into their actions really fast. So they're a fun team to watch. But also, this past week, All-Star voting has opened up.
Yeah. So who do you think is going to be an All-Star? That's not obviously the obvious, but is there anybody that you think should be an All-Star?
You said it already, Kayla McBride. She's shooting 51% from the 3, 49% from the field. It's just, her shot is so quick. It's really hard to guard. And because like I said, they get into their actions really fast. A lot of people are trailing her. That catch and shoot is really fast. Even off the dribble, it's really fast. So if you're a young player that's a shooter, I recommend watching Kayla McBride's clips. I mean, she's a lock on All-Star to me.
I want to add to that too, because I don't know if your coach was like this, but a lot of the times you're kind of, let's give up the mid-range shot because you want to take away the drive, take away the 3. And I feel like she's just so lethal, even getting, like you said, off the bounce, getting into that dribble, gets into her shot quickly and elevates. Like, I remember, again, I watched them against the Connecticut Sun. Like, she was going for the last shot to tie the game, and it was a good shot. Like, she just missed at the front of the rim, but she's that type of player who is clutch as well and can make those.
Yeah. She's definitely playing at the highest level in her career right now. But who else do you think has?
I want to talk about Dearica Hamby. I think, one, she is a relentless player, right? Rebounds really well, but she also makes me think of, just as when I think about my playing days, having a player on your team who owns their role, right? That they are a star in their role, and that's what she does. She is going to pursue every basket out there. And one thing that really, I don't know if many people know, but she was a 6th player of the year before developing into an All-Star in 2021, 2022. So she's somebody who's kind of built, like, each and every year has progressed and has gotten better. And I think even last year we talked about how she had a baby and came back and was ready to go like that. That's impressive. So I think she's somebody whose definitely name should be mentioned at least.
Yeah, 100%. Do we think that, you know how when people vote and they're like, oh, their team doesn't win, do we think winning should have an impact on
Yeah.
the voting?
This is such a maybe little controversial because everybody's like, well, their team sucks. Like they could be
Uh,
the best player. I think for me personally, I think I'm going to say to some extent I think your team needs to be good, right? Like but it's all I don't know, actually I feel like it's hard because what if you're the only one piece who's like the best player and as you know, we've both played, sometimes some players just don't get it or have the same IQ as you and it's hard if not everybody's on that same level as you to have a successful team. But I'm gonna go with yes because then think about it. This league is filled with talent.
mhm.
Like then at that point we could just pick a lot of different people. You know.
Yeah. I don't
What
know.
about you?
I think we have to remember what we're voting on because
Right.
say if it's like MVP or these accolades, I think that's when a lot of the winning comes into play. But the All-Star game, I think people just want to see the best players play
That's
against the best players, you know?
yeah.
So I think it should be interesting and we'll see who ends up on these teams. But
For
we
sure.
also have a new style of our All-Star game. Can you talk to a little bit about that?
Yeah, let's talk about that. So
Yeah.
the US national team is gonna be playing Team WNBA, which I'm excited about this because I think it's gonna make it more competitive, right? You talk about Um, well, first of all, we talk about there being 12 teams in the WNBA, and there's all this talent and not many spots left, right? And I think because now there's also Team WNBA, also All Stars, you're going to give opportunities to players, even younger players. We talk about. I'm trying to think of, except not Caitlin Clark because we obviously I think she's a great player, but like people like who aren't getting the look or all-star love that they deserve that will
Right.
have the opportunity to play at that type of stage. I think so.
I also think that the All-Star game will just be more fun to watch as well because you have the All-Star team playing Team USA, and Team
Yeah.
USA is using this as a scrimmage to get ready for the Olympics. So it's not
Right.
going to be our typical All-Star game where people are just throwing it off the
Pulling
backboard,
around.
yeah, pulling it from half court. Like USA is going to be playing for real.
They're
So
coming.
we're we're talking about the best 12 players in the world versus probably the next best 12 players in the world.
Right.
So it's going to be a really fun game to watch and I'm excited.
I agree. Um, and speaking of Team USA, the Olympic rosters have come out for the 5v5, 3x3. What do you think about the rosters so far?
I guess we'll start with 3-on-3. I'm just so happy for my old teammate Haley Van Lith. She
Right.
obviously, I think she needed a win this year, and she put a lot of work into the 3-on-3 system. So I'm really happy that she made the team. And also Sierra Burdick. She's been a 3-on-3 legend for a while, and I think she's deserved this accolade. A lot of the other girls that have been on the 3-on-3 national team are huge names. You know of them: Ryan Howard, Cameron Brink, Haley Van Lith, and then last year Jackie Young, Kelsey
Yeah.
Plum, whatever. So a lot of people haven't heard of Sierra Burdick, but she's put in her
She's a baller.
time. She's a baller. She's put in her time into the 3-on-3 system, and she wins. So I'm excited to see her on the biggest stage, and I think they can go for gold.
I
What about
also you mentioned Haley because obviously she's your old former teammate, but I am excited for her because I know she's kind of jumped around from team to team and had she struggled a little bit towards the end of that run. So
yeah,
I think this is just a nice like okay, let me go out there, represent my country, play my game the way I know how to ball out, and I think it's especially for 3x3. I'm in Kosovo right now and we had a 3x3 qualifier, so I was watching a little bit of that and it is such a different style from obviously from
100.
5v5. So I think that for 3x3 you need people who could penetrate and get to the basket. If you don't have those type of players, it's going to be super hard because there's not much room to work with. It's in a half court setting and you're just you're trying to essentially create and get to the rim. And I think Haley and Sierra are both those type of players who can create off the bounce or in whatever form.
Yeah, you definitely can find your mojo back playing 3-on-3. It's so much fun, so quick. But let's talk about 5-on-5. There's a lot of controversy around that.
Yeah.
Obviously, what do
Should
you
we
make?
even talk about this? No, I'm playing.
Like, what do you make about that?
Look, I think it's obviously the talk around Caitlin Clark and all the attention she's getting. Um, she's new into this league, right? I think she also understands the decision and why it was made
Yeah, it's
and
media
people
that's
who are for her. Yeah, media is coming. I think she's very like, hey, I know I'm going to work my. She is going to be on an Olympic team. It's not that
yeah,
she's not going to be, but it's like, who would she replace right now?
exactly.
That is the big question mark because you have all these great players. I just think she will be ready. Maybe she's not right now, and we know she's been struggling a little bit. But my question is, do we think she would perform the way she usually does because now she's around the best of the best?
Possibly. Also because I think some teams in the international realm aren't as good as the USA team, but the international ball has been getting better and people are just as physical overseas, even maybe more physical in FIBA. They let a lot of stuff go. So
Right.
I don't know. But I do think because she's surrounded by so many other good players that she would be able to get a lot of the
Right, that's what I'm
maybe she's
thinking.
yeah, that maybe she's not be able to get right now with the Indiana Fever. But I just want to also say like the videos of these women receiving the news that they made the WNBA, I mean the Olympic roster have just been unbelievable. You could see their emotion and how much they've worked and cared for that. So to say, "Oh, just here, you can have the spot over these people," it just kind of doesn't make sense. I think a
Right.
lot,
It's tough.
yeah, and I think a lot of the argument that people are making for Caitlyn is just clickbait. I don't think people really believe
Right.
that she should be on the team over all of these women.
I think too that all these people who are commenting on this, and if you haven't been watching the WNBA and all the talent that there's been, I think it's the new fan base that Caitlyn has brought, which is amazing, right? The game is growing and we need that. But I think it's those people who don't understand, like, no, you have put like Arike, who is a stud, is not,
Yeah.
on. So it's just like, I don't know. It's really
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
my two
A
cents.
lot of people's argument is, "Oh, DT is too old to make the roster."
Yeah.
What do you think about?
I I mean, I think she has been playing for such a long time, and is she able to perform maybe the way that she has been 5, 10 years ago? Probably not. But I will say, like, she's still kind of
She's
like
cooking.
she's her, she's still cooking the way that a Caitlin Clark would have been cooking.
Right.
So I don't know. I think it's more probably a respect thing that like, yeah, yo, Diana Taurasi is the GOAT. Like she
Yeah.
is her and she's been doing this for a long time that she's probably gonna get that leverage.
Well, we'll see if they go for she can go for 6 gold medals.
Yes.
Yeah.
But
If
all
she
right.
was if she wasn't on the roster, who do you think would have replaced her? Or
Well, we talked about Caitlin. I think Arike is somebody who personally I like as a player.
yeah.
I think she's just such a dog on the court, and you've seen how aggressive she is on offense. She's a great defensive player. I always think about when I think about Arike, I just always think about the NCAA runs. Like what she did was nuts. Um, like back to back buzzer beaters. Like if you have Kobe Bryant talking about you being the best out there, like being the best, I don't know. I
Yeah.
think she's a very high caliber player, and it's like, look, there's so many people that have been left off, and that's just the case.
Well, we're rooting for them and hope that they achieve gold. But speaking of all of this USA talk in the Olympics, let's speak to one of the assistant coaches on the team.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to She's Always On. We have a special guest here, Mike Thibault. He was the head coach for the Washington Mystics, Connecticut's Sun, three-time WNBA Coach of the Year, and will be serving as an assistant for the Olympic Games for Team USA. So, Coach, thanks for for being on, and we're excited to chat with you.
Thanks. Good morning, or whatever time it is for you.
Yes, I'm 6 hours ahead in Kosovo.
So,
But
yes.
yeah, so we'll get right into it. We'll start off with, obviously you're preparing for the national team here. How is the selection process like? I know there's been a lot of talk about that. What kind of goes into selecting the best of the best?
Well, the interesting part is the coaches have no say. So,
Really?
no, there's a committee totally independent of the selection process, and we have had all these players in our various training camps over the last couple of years since the World Cup in Australia, and we get to evaluate them, and we can have our opinion within our group, but the committee does talk to Cheryl Reeve, the head coach, about how she feels about things, but it's an independent committee of 6 people who make the final decision. They're from different, they're former players on the Olympic team, general manager, somebody from the league office, team president, but 5 of the people on the 6-person committee, I think, were all WNBA players at one point. So they make the final decision, and we coach whoever they pick.
That's awesome. What do you make of all the drama surrounding you guys right now?
I try to ignore it. I mean, my whole thing is, there are a lot of deserving people. I mean, no matter what, there's always going to be multiple players, not just one player, multiple players who are left off the team, who are really good. You've either been on it before. I mean, right now I coach Ariel Atkins, or have Ariel Atkins here in D.C., and she was on the last Olympic team and the last World Cup team, but she didn't make this one. And that's we've seen in the past. There's been other players left off for various reasons. Worried about injuries, worried about other things, and so my whole thing is, my job is just to coach whoever's there when we start, next month. And so I'm spending my time preparing for particular opponents, trying to get a feel for the teams in our pool, and let everybody else worry about all the drama.
Yeah.
You're like, I'll stay on social media.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a social media person as a general rule anyway, here and there, but I that's unfortunately and fortunately part of the growth of our game. But it tends to get overhyped, or everything is a crisis, or everything is a big deal. And at the end of the day, not everybody's always going to be happy with what happens anyway. And you can make a case for a lot of different people to be on this team, but we have the team that's really good in front of us, and that's what we're going to go do. We're going to win a gold medal.
Yeah. Now, how intense is that preparation to get ready for the Olympics? What does that look like?
It is intense, partly because we have the least amount of time to prepare compared to all the countries. We've had, I think a good several training camps in the past, 12 months. We started out last November with a college tour. We played Tennessee and Duke, and we had a 4-day period in the middle where we went to Atlanta and had good practices, but you don't have your full group. And then in February, we were part of the Olympic qualifying process. Even though we had already qualified, you're required to play in the tournaments. And so we went to Belgium and played in that tournament there. And then at the Final Four, we had a 3-day camp. But once we start in July, we go to Phoenix for All-Star. We have 2 days of practice before that game. And then we fly right from there to London to play Germany in an exhibition game. And, 5 days after that, we're, opening the Olympics. And so you don't have the same amount of practice times. Most of the other countries have gotten together already, are playing exhibition games. They're taking tours. Julie Van Loo on our team is on the Belgium team, and she is missing some of their training camp because she wanted to play in the WNBA. But they're going to play several exhibition games before we even get together. So it's a little bit different. Obviously we've always had an advantage with the depth of our team compared to a lot of other countries, but they have the advantage in preparation time.
And speaking of your depth, you guys have so many stars on the team. What's that like in the dynamic? Do you feel like as coaches, you guys deal with egos because everyone is a star technically?
I think that most of the players that play for USA basketball understand that they are sacrificing something for the greater good.
Mm,
That's been one of the hallmarks of our team. It's why we've been successful. Um, you and I think they all look forward to playing with somebody that they've competed against. Now I get to be on their side, and so
yeah.
and I think that the skill sets really complement each other. We have a lot of versatile players, people that can play two or three positions, and I think that makes it easier. Um, I don't think you get to this level without having a healthy ego to want to be great. But I think most of our players over time have, set the what I would call the selfish ego aside for doing what we need to win. And that's been my experience. I did the 2006 World Cup and 2008 Beijing Olympics. I did the World Cup in Australia, and our teams in all of that time have always been very together. They like each other. I think because they've played against each other so much and had to scout each other, they know tendencies. And so that helps a little bit in the preparation that if you're a guard, what Brianna Stewart likes to do or Asia Wilson likes to do, and vice versa. And so I think that helps us because they see each other's games so often.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. A lot of people obviously haven't seen a lot of international basketball. Who is USA's biggest threat, if there are any?
Oh, there are threats. I think, it's really growing. And we had a very tough game. We didn't have all of our group in February, but we had a down to the wire game with Belgium. They're led by Emma Miesemann, who was the MVP for us in the finals in
Yeah.
2019. China is a very formidable foe. They were great at the World Cup in Australia 2 years ago. They have experienced players. Canada is a coming power. Australia, Lauren Jackson and Ezzy Magbegor, and you can go down the list. They are loaded with WNBA players. And then
Right.
the host country France has been priming for this Olympics. And I think their young group of players is really good. I'm sure I'm leaving somebody out, but the basketball world is getting a little bit smaller in the sense that there are good teams everywhere now. You used to have Olympic games that were just total blowouts. You could say, okay, we're going to win by 40 or 50.
Yeah.
There might be a handful of those, but that's not predominant. Every night, you're going and thinking, we really have to be ready to play. And so that's in the preparation. I think the scouting part and knowing the other teams as best we can inside and out is going to have to be something we're very good at.
Yeah.
And what do you think is the hardest adjustment when playing overseas versus the WNBA, kind of the FIBA style of basketball?
I think it used to be more of a difference. I think over the last few years, a lot more of the rules have become similar. But I think the biggest difference from a strategy standpoint is there are no defensive 3 seconds. Our
Mm,
players are so used to, the defensive rules in our league, and you go play in an international tournament and everybody can play a zone. They can do whatever they want defensively. And so not only do you face that, but you have to remind yourself that, oh, I can help
I
more
can say,
defensively. I can stay and help because it's allowed. And you're so used to trying to get out of the lane on the weak side and everything else. Now you can stay, and it helps your defense, but you have to remind yourself that it's okay. I
Yeah.
think the other part of it is um, most of the good European teams, maybe not so much, some of the other countries, but the European teams have historically all been great movement teams. You're having a guard cuts off the ball, give and go situations, and I think you have to kind of readjust your mental process that, it's not going to be just one-on-one, or it's going to be two-man pick and roll, or whatever it is. There's going to be a lot more movement, and you have to defend off the ball much better than you do maybe sometimes in our league because of the rules too.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a tough adjustment. I feel like I've faced that a lot in Korea. People are
I
just
got
Yep.
called for traveling all the time too.
Yeah,
There's
the traveling rules are a little bit different too. It's a little bit more of a stickler. What you can do. Their interpretation of a 1-2 or a pivot foot is a little different.
yeah, you're traveling. I'm like, how? My foot
Yep.
is down.
Yep.
But
Well, you've had a legendary coaching career and you've coached so many greats. What separates the good players from the great ones from your experience watching?
I mean, obviously, talent's the first thing. I mean, you have to have just great ability to start out. But I think there's a couple things. And this first one will sound a little bit cliche, but it's really true. And, trying to get that through to our young players is that you have to be willing to do the boring things over and over and be great. Sometimes players look at you about when you're working about finishing at the basket and layups and everything else. And then, you miss them and you say, oh, maybe coach was, not so far off. But I think the great players are willing to do all the boring stuff over and over and over. It's like that 10,000 rule they talk about in anything. The 10,000 hours to be a great pianist or to be a great, um, gymnast or whatever it is. You have to be willing to put in all the work. I think the second part of it is that you can't be afraid to make mistakes while you're learning. I think too much today we have young players who are afraid to look bad, so they won't try something or work on something over and over until you master it. And that's kind of connected to what I was saying about the 10,000 hour rule too, but you have to be willing to make mistakes to get better. And then I just think it's the day-to-day discipline to do all those things. That you don't get up in the morning and talk yourself out of going to the gym when you're supposed to, and do something that's a little easier. I'll tell a story about Michael Jordan when I coached him, and he loves golf, but he also wanted to become a good three-point shooter. So he kind of made a deal with himself one off season that he wanted to go to the golf course, but he wasn't going to go until he got his 500 shots up that morning. So if he had an early tee time, then he got to the gym earlier. And, that was a discipline that you had to do if you wanted to add something to your game. And I think all the great players are willing to do that discipline. You're not the first one out of the gym after practice. And then the last part is you just got to have a competitive spirit. You got to want to go through the tough times and play. I remember one of my first feelings when I got to the NBA as an assistant coach. I'd come from college and came from a fairly competitive group of players. But if we lost a game in the NBA, and we had Magic and Kareem in that group, Magic Johnson would have just as soon gone and played 3 hours later and played the next game right then just to get that taste out of his mouth of a loss. I think nowadays we've, and I'll be old school about this too. When I grew up, in order to stay on the court, you had to keep winning. You didn't want to go sit. Nowadays, with AAU being the primary thing, you have a 10 o'clock game, you have a noon game, and a 4 o'clock game, and it's almost like it doesn't matter whether you win or lose those games, because you're playing again at a certain time. You got your nice gym bag and your uniform, and it's not the same as Saturday morning trying to keep the court because you want to keep playing. And I think that's a real competitive thing that young players just don't go through as much. And I think that's you got to want to be great by how you compete. And I think that's the separator for a lot of these players.
I do have a add-on question to that. You talk about wanting to be great, and I feel like I'm learning a lot as I'm stepping into this different role here with my national team. How are you able to pull that out of some people who, I guess, are or not as competitive, or is that something you just have to have within you, or is this something, fine line between being tough on them versus still building their confidence? How, as a coach, have you handled that?
I will say honestly that I think the best ones are going to be that before you ever get them in many ways. I think that the borderline ones, some can be pushed one way versus the other, but I think it's the environment you're in and what kind of support you get around you. The worst thing you can have as a player, uh, and we all see it, is people with voices around you who coddle you or tell you you're okay. You know, we don't want to offend anybody. I think you have to have a willingness to get through the tough time. And as a coach, you can only do so much for a player, that they have to do it themselves, but they have to have some other people in their corner, I think, a lot of times to help them get through the tough times. Whether it's a parent, a good friend, a sibling, whatever it is, you got to have the right voices around you to stick with that. And it's difficult.
Yeah.
I think young people today, there's so much judgment passed on social media,
Yeah.
that what people say about you or what you think about yourself on social media is not who you are. Who you are is who you are when you look in the mirror and say, okay, am I doing the right things? But we live in a society that's become predominant. And so it's made it difficult, I think, for players to be as great as they can be. I'm preaching now, but
I love this because it's so, I feel like there's such a big gap too, even with the younger generation, and kind of throughout your coaching career, you've been in this business for such a long time. Have you felt like you've had to evolve a little bit as a coach because of how things have changed?
I think you always have to anyway, but I think that there's a good and a bad to it. I think being around young players keeps me younger. So I think it made it easier for me to do this as long as I've done it. But I do feel now it's getting harder. And so, I think the first thing is you're not going to have coaches. Coaches aren't going to succeed like the old Bobby Knight days and, screaming and yelling at players. That just doesn't work.
Right.
And it shouldn't anyway.
Yeah.
But I think that one of the best things you can do as a coach is there's two parts to it. One, be really honest with your players, but convey it in a manner that's respectful, and then be a good listener in return. Um, you know, let I think players have to have input to their success, and they have to have buy-in, and so you have to have their voice too. I know that even more over the course of the years, I went to my players, especially my veteran players, and said, hey, give me your point of view. What do you see that I'm missing? Let me know how you're feeling physically as a team, or what kind of things am I doing a bad job of not getting through to people? Sometimes you just have to teach differently. I think a lot of coaches for years tried the one size fits all approach, and you can't. Every person's different, so you have to learn how players learn. Everybody learns different. Some are visual learners. Some have to walk through it. Some can read it on a piece of paper. Some need to watch videotape. I think that's part of it, and I think some of them have different focus issues. Attention spans are different, and so I think you have to learn your players, and their characteristics, and what makes it, what turns that switch for them. Find that, and I think you'll have some success.
Like myself, you have a basketball family. My dad also coached with my brother.
Yep.
So how special was that for you to coach with your son? And were there any arguments on how to guard somebody at the dinner table?
Um, I think we had healthy debates. I think
Hmm,
I think it was
it's
funny when he first came on my staff. When I got to Washington, he had helped out in Connecticut when I was there. When he was in college, when he was home for the summer, and did individual workouts with players. But when he came on my staff, I think the rest of our staff was like, "Oh my God, they can argue and not kill each other." And we still debate things. But I think that's also healthy. I don't want, as a head coach, a bunch of yes people around me. I want people who have ideas, who are willing to share them. At the end of the day, if you're the head coach, you still have to make the final decision, because it's on you. That's who's being judged. But I think that we've done a pretty good job over the time of handling that. Um, I mean, like anything else, whether it's a family or anything else, you're going to have disagreements over things, but we haven't let it carry over, very long.
Yeah.
And every coach is different in how they want their team to look a little bit. Um, for a while, the last couple of years I was the coach, I did more of the offense and he did more of the defense. But we sat and talked it all through, and we had an assistant coach in Latoya Sanders, who was a great defensive specialist as a player. And so you want all of your staff to be able to bring different things to it. But it's been fun. I mean, to be around your son that often. I've had a lot of people in other professions tell me, "But I'm so jealous that I can do that. I would love to be able to do that with my son or daughter." Now, everybody says me and my daughter might not be able to coexist if we were on the same staff,
I
because
was going to say,
we're too much alike.
covering Carly's team, I feel like maybe you're right on that.
Yeah, I mean, she's
It's
we
awesome.
joke about it. We probably could, but it would be she has her way of doing things. Eric has his way of doing things, and I have mine, and that they're all okay. That's just part of being different as coaches. You shouldn't be cookie cutters.
Yeah. But now that you have transitioned from being a coach to a GM, do you have a hard time not putting that input to your son?
Mm.
Saying like, make
Um, no, I don't actually. As a general rule, we have a conversation every couple of days about maybe he'll say, "What did you see about that?" I Because I did both jobs at the same time, I have an appreciation for, seeing it from both sides. I was my own boss as a GM over the coaching part, so I go home and have arguments with myself. So, um, I think I will insert an opinion occasionally, but I don't go to any of their coaches' meetings. I don't sit in on it. The only time I sit in on our coaches' meetings is we have weekly player development meetings. And that's still part of my job, is to, oversee, what we're doing for, individual player growth. So I sit in those. I don't miss waking up at 6 a.m. with 20 thoughts in my head about practice. I don't miss thinking that I have to run home right after the game and watch the film right away. That, yeah, I could watch it tomorrow if I want, or I could choose not to because I don't want to watch them again.
Right.
And so, that part's been good. But we do talk about, like opponents, because I've seen so many of these teams for so long. I watch practice. I don't say anything. Um, I find it better to sit a little farther up at games, although at home I have courtside seats across, but not across from our bench. I don't want any of that, eye
The looks.
contact during a game. So I try to avoid that at all costs, and I never sit behind the bench ever, because I don't want any perception out there that I would be trying to say something or doing my own coaching. It's his team, his staff's team. Um, it still has my imprint on it because I help select the players, and we're going through a transition. But he's been ready for a while. He's turned down other jobs in the league, and so because he wanted to stay here, and he's been ready.
That's awesome. Well, the next question here is, you tweeted about Jerry West and how he gave you your start in the NBA. Can you talk a little bit more about that, kind of what he's meant to you, and just what type of start was that?
Yeah, so I was a college assistant coach up in Lacey, Washington, up in the state of Washington. It's a D2 school, and so you didn't have huge budgets for going out recruiting. You kind of, were unlimited. And it used to be that the NBA, when teams went west from east to west, they would go Seattle, Portland, Golden State, LA. So I was halfway between Seattle and Portland, and I was friends with Jerry's coaching staff, and I had worked Jerry's basketball camp in LA in the summer, and got to know him a little bit. And they decided they wanted to hire a scout to scout teams before they came to LA. So on a lot of my off nights, I would go back and forth to either Seattle or Portland to scout opponents, and that's how I got my start. He hired me for that. And then when Coach Westhead came in, Jerry had given it up and was the GM, so I was brought in to be an assistant coach. And back in those days, you didn't have like 15 staff members, so Jerry hired me as an assistant coach and then as the director of player personnel. And so I literally was on the road all the time, scouting college games, opponents, and trying to be with the team. So I I barely slept in my own bed for a
Wow.
couple years. So, but he was the one that trusted me, with a lot of player personnel decisions and trades we made or people we brought in. And so, I'm forever grateful for the start that he gave me. And he was a very open, honest person. Everybody can tell you if you had a basketball discussion with Jerry West. Uh, you knew exactly what he felt. Uh, he
That's
did.
good.
Yeah, it was, and that was part of my learning. Like, you know, my wife
Be
and I
honest.
argue sometimes that I'm too honest. Sometimes you might just not want to say it. But I felt like he taught me that if you were going to get your job done, you weren't going to just do what other people thought you should do. You needed to know what you thought was right from a personnel decision or a human decision, whatever it was. And I really appreciated him.
That's awesome.
What has been the biggest difference between coaching in the NBA and the WNBA?
Well, we're not throwing lobs for dunks.
Yeah, there you go.
That was literally that was one of the first things that was different because it changes your offense and your defense.
Yeah.
I was thinking recently, if I were an NBA coach, how would I have to coach different? I was kind of doing it back in reverse now, and
Okay.
defending against length and jumping ability was the first thing. I had players when I came into the W that you know if you got trapped against the sideline or everything else, a lot of guys could just jump and get themselves out of trouble
Yeah.
because of their athletic ability and size. And so I had to adjust that, our players really needed to be coached in, certain things along that line. Um, just because of size and strength and quickness, um, NBA players can cover more ground in a quicker amount of time. I mean, I've watched tapes that they've done, like LeBron James going from strong side to weak side, or vice versa, can cover it in an incredible amount of, short amount of time. As our athletes get bigger and stronger and faster, that gap is narrowing. But 20 years ago was a much bigger gap.
Yeah.
I think that I say this the right way. I think that the elite players in our league are incredibly elite relative to the rest of the league. I think the gap has to narrow in the WNBA somewhere in the middle players a little bit. We have great rookies coming in, and I think over the next few years we're going to see the talent pool increase in our league with more depth to the league. But in the NBA, I mean, you turn around, there's great players sitting on
Every-
benches everywhere,
Yeah.
and for 30 teams. And
Yeah.
you have a G League that allows development of some of those players too. We don't have that in our league. The developmental part is if you don't make a roster, your way to develop, as you guys know, is to go overseas or find another. You don't have that avenue of going to the G League
Yeah.
and working on your game and having been a direct affiliation with an NBA team. So I think that's a big difference. I couldn't, I was part of the developmental league for a while in the old CBA, which is now the G League on the men's side, and you could see I was graduating players to the NBA who were really good players, and so that depth of players still isn't quite there yet. I know college fans and everybody are really up in arms when some of the younger players get cut that were names in college, but it's hard to make a team in our league.
It's a
I know. I
You
know.
know. It's really hard. And I told players, when we cut them, this is a little different. I mean, you're in the top 200 players in the world and can get cut in the
Yeah.
WNBA. You can be in the top 500 and still be in the NBA, and
Yeah.
that's a huge difference. And so, it'll be great as we get more expansion teams and we can develop more players. But it's also going to take a while because we need that to carry over for a few years where players are getting that experience. It's not all going to happen at once.
Yeah. Well, I try to explain to people too, like, this is the first 20, 30 years in the WNBA,
Yes.
and the NBA has been around for 70, going on 80. So we have
Yep.
a long way to go. We're just at the start of it. So,
Yeah, between salaries and depth and number of teams and exposure, I
yeah.
mean, we're way ahead of where the NBA was as far as TV exposure and fans being able to see it, partly because, technology has changed and everything else. But when I first went in the NBA in the late 70s, the NBA finals were on tape delay. Literally, when we won the championship in LA in 1980, we won the game in Philadelphia. It was on tape delay on the West Coast.
Wow.
And it's crazy.
So like they won. And you're like, oh.
Yeah. People out west are going, well, I think they won, but we're not sure. We'll watch in a few hours.
What is something as a coach throughout your career that you've always tried to stay true to that has helped you grow?
I think there's a couple things. One is stick with what I said earlier about you have to be honest with yourself and with your players. And being honest with yourself has to be at the forefront of that. Do the same self-evaluation you want players to do of yourself. Be curious. Think that you have to keep learning. If you think you've been coaching, I don't know, just pick 20 years and you're set, you're not
Nope.
even close because the
Right.
game's changing constantly. The rules change. We're seeing offenses now that people didn't think about, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So I think you have to always be curious. That I guess that's also stay current. Be aware. And the last part of that, the curious part, is going to be creative. Find new ways to reach your players. Kind of what you asked earlier on. Is there another way that they're going to learn better? Is there something else that I can teach them, or is there a catchword that will sink in with them? And I think that say this the right way. There's all the talk today about mental health. I think that we have to be very aware of coaches of where our players are, in their lives and all the different outside pressures. We talked about social media. We talked about, other things. I think you have to be very conscious of, there are a lot of distractions. We would like to think and always hope as coaches that, the 2 or 3 hours in the gym every day is maybe, their escape from the rest of the world. Hopefully it doesn't have to be an escape, but it can be. But it's hard. We would like our players to drop the baggage at the door, but I'd like to find a way as a coach to help reduce the baggage that everybody has. I think we've got more stuff going on in our lives than we ever had. I didn't grow up, where you had instant access to everything, and so, players that are coming into our league now have had that their whole life. And it's such a different world to live in. And I think as a coach, you have to be very aware of that.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, this has been fun, Coach. Before we let you go, I want to ask, who do you think wins tonight, Dallas or Celtics?
It's funny. I heard Luca say yesterday he's just going to go have fun tonight, which means they'll probably play a little better. But I just feel like I feel like Boston kind of knows they can end it.
Yeah.
It just feels that way. Normally, I would always say, "Oh, it'll get to a game 5," but right now, I think physically and emotionally, they have such a huge advantage right now. They have more weapons.
Yeah.
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 I agree. Thanks so much, Coach. This is great. I feel like I learned a lot too.
Well,
So
It's been an interesting career to just kind of see new generations as I go. So it's been
Well,
fun.
that's what I'm saying. Like from the
Yeah,
youngers, been through it all, and I feel like you have to evolve. So it's really cool to get to hear your side of it as well.
appreciate it very much.
Thank you
All
so
right,
much.
Coach. Thank you.